February 14, 2026, 2:47 a.m. Morozovsk Airfield, Rostov Oblast, Russia. 4 Su-34 fighter bombers sit on the tarmac, fueled, armed, loaded with FAB-500 glide bombs meant for Ukrainian positions along the Donetsk front. By 5:30 a.m., all 4 aircraft would be burning wreckage. A fuel depot would be a pillar of black smoke visible from 60 kilometers away. And Russian close air support along the entire Donetsk axis would go silent for nearly 2 weeks. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't luck. This was a Ukrainian drone swarm planned for months, executed in under 3 hours. And it didn't just destroy aircraft. It exposed a vulnerability that the Russian aerospace forces thought they had solved. They hadn't. I'm your host at WarfistTV, where we analyze the battles that change wars. And today, we're breaking down one of the most devastating airfield strikes of the entire conflict. A strike that didn't require a single manned aircraft. A strike that cost Ukraine a fraction of what Russia lost. A strike that rewrote the calculus of air power in this war. Because when a country with no functioning air force can reach 180 kilometers into enemy territory and destroy frontline bombers on the ground, something fundamental has changed in modern warfare. Let's break it down. To understand why the Morozovsk strike happened in February 2026, you need to understand what Morozovsk Airfield had become. Located roughly 180 kilometers from the nearest point on the Ukrainian-controlled front line, Morozovsk had been one of Russia's primary operational bases for Su-34 fullback fighter bombers since the early months of the full-scale invasion. The Su-34 is Russia's workhorse for frontline strike missions. Twin-seat, twin-engine, designed as a long-range interdiction aircraft, but repurposed in this war for something far more immediate, dropping glide bombs on Ukrainian positions. The FAB-500, a 500-kilogram general-purpose bomb fitted with a UMPK glide kit, had become one of the deadliest weapons in Russia's arsenal by late 2025. Su-34s would take off from Morozovsk, fly to a release point behind their own lines, lob the glide bomb at ranges of up to 70 kilometers, and return without ever entering Ukrainian air defense envelopes. The damage was enormous. Ukrainian frontline units along the Donetsk sector reported FAB-500 strikes, hitting fortified positions, trenches, supply routes, and command posts. Some days, Morozovsk-based aircraft conducted as many as 12 sorties. Each sortie could deliver 2 to 4 glide bombs. That's potentially 48 guided munitions per day, falling on Ukrainian soldiers from a single airfield. Ukraine had struck Morozovsk before. In the summer of 2024, Storm Shadow cruise missiles hit the base, damaging hardened aircraft shelters and destroying at least 2 Su-34s on the ground. Russia repaired what it could. Some of the shelters remained damaged, others were patched but not fully restored to their original protection level. Additional revetments, open-topped earthen berms meant to shield parked aircraft from shrapnel, were constructed along the taxiways. But revetments aren't shelters. They protect against blast fragments from nearby explosions. They do nothing against a drone descending vertically from above. And by early 2026, Ukraine had something it didn't have in 2024. A mature long-range drone strike capability. Ukraine's Drone Warfare Command had evolved rapidly throughout 2025. What began as improvised operations with modified commercial drones had become a sophisticated multi-layered strike architecture. Long-range one-way attack UAVs, sometimes called kamikaze drones or loitering munitions, though neither term fully captures what they had become, were now being produced domestically in quantities that would have seemed impossible 2 years earlier. These weren't Shahed 136 copies. Ukrainian engineers had developed multiple families of strike UAVs with ranges exceeding 1,000 kilometers, GPS and inertial navigation systems, terminal guidance packages, and warheads tailored for different target types. Some carried fragmentation payloads for soft targets. Others carried shaped charges designed to penetrate hardened structures. A few carried thermobaric warheads for fuel and ammunition storage. Which weapon was deadlier in this strike? The SEAD drones that blinded Russian air defenses, the heavy strike drones that hit the aircraft, or the follow-up wave that detonated the fuel depot? Drop your answer in the comments below. The planning for the Morozovsk strike began in late January 2026. Ukrainian military intelligence, the HUR, had been monitoring the airfield continuously via satellite imagery, signals intelligence, and human sources. The pattern was clear. Morozovsk operated on a predictable cycle. Aircraft would fly sorties during daylight hours, return by late afternoon, undergo maintenance and rearming through the evening, and sit on the tarmac through the night for early morning launches. The critical window was between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. During those hours, aircraft were parked, crews were in their quarters, and the base operated on a reduced alert status. Air defense systems were active, but crews rotated on 4-hour watches, and reaction times were slower than during operational hours. Ukrainian intelligence also identified a specific vulnerability. Several of the hardened shelters damaged in the 2024 Storm Shadow strikes had not been fully repaired. At least 4 Su-34s were being parked in open revetments along the eastern taxiway, rather than in closed shelters. Satellite passes confirmed this pattern repeatedly throughout January. The revetments offered protection from ground-level blast, but their tops were open to the sky. Ukraine's Drone Warfare Command designed a 3-phase attack plan. Phase 1, suppress enemy air defenses. Phase 2, strike primary targets, the parked Su-34s. Phase 3, hit secondary targets of opportunity, specifically the fuel storage facility adjacent to the eastern flight line. The execution would require precise timing, multiple drone types, and approach vectors designed to confuse and overwhelm the airfield's defensive systems. Let's talk about those defensive systems. Morozovsk was not undefended. Far from it. The airfield was protected by an S-300 PM2 battalion positioned approximately 4 kilometers to the northeast. This system, a modernized variant of the Cold War-era S-300, carries 48 N-6E2 missiles with a range of 200 kilometers and an engagement altitude from 10 meters to 27 kilometers. On paper, it should be able to engage incoming drones. In practice, the S-300 has a problem with low-altitude, slow-moving targets. Its radar is optimized for aircraft and ballistic missiles, fast, high-altitude threats with large radar cross-sections. A Ukrainian strike drone flying at 50 meters altitude at 180 kilometers per hour with a radar cross-section smaller than a large bird presents a fundamentally different challenge. The radar can detect it, but tracking and engaging multiple such targets simultaneously strains the system's capacity. Supplementing the S-300 were 2 Pantsir-S1 short-range air defense systems positioned on the airfield perimeter. The Pantsir combines radar-guided missiles with twin 30mm autocannons and is specifically designed for close-in defense against cruise missiles and drones. Effective range, 20 kilometers for missiles, 4 kilometers for guns. This is the system that should have stopped the attack. There were also several Zu-23-2 twin-barreled anti-aircraft guns positioned around the flight line. These manually operated 23mm guns are Soviet-era relics, but against low-altitude drones they can be effective if crews are alert and targets are visible. Stay with me, because what happens over the next 3 hours becomes one of the most precisely orchestrated drone strikes of the entire war. The first phase launched at approximately 2:15 a.m. local time. A group of smaller decoy and CD drones, a suppression of enemy air defenses, crossed into Russian airspace from a westerly bearing, flying at altitudes between 30 and 80 meters. These drones were not carrying large warheads. Their primary mission was threefold: identify active radar emitters, force air defense crews to engage and reveal their positions, and saturate the defensive network's tracking capacity. The S-300 battalion's engagement radar lit up at 2:23 a.m. Operators detected multiple low-altitude contacts approaching from the west-southwest. Standard protocol called for engaging with missiles, but the targets were small, slow, and numerous. Firing a 48 N-6E2 missile, each costing roughly $1.5 million, at a drone worth a few $1,000s is not just economically absurd. It depletes the launcher's finite missile supply. The Pantsir-S1 crews received handoff from the S-300. They began engaging with their own missile systems, claiming at least 3 interceptions within the first 10 minutes. The 30mm cannons opened fire on targets within visual range, tracers arcing into the dark sky. This is exactly what Ukraine wanted, because while every Russian air defense operator on the base was looking west, the main strike package was approaching from the northeast. Phase 2 launched from a different staging area. These were heavier strike UAVs, larger airframes carrying warheads in the 15 to 30 kilogram range, with terminal guidance systems designed for precision impact. Their approach route took them over sparsely populated agricultural land northeast of the airfield, where radar coverage was thinner, and the terrain offered masking opportunities behind low ridgelines. At 2:47 a.m., the first strike drone reached the airfield perimeter. It descended through the gap between the S-300's engagement envelope and the Pantsir's radar coverage. The Pantsir crews were still engaging decoys to the west. The S-300's tracking radar was saturated with contacts from the first wave. The drone's terminal guidance activated. It identified its target, a Su-34 parked in the second revetment along the eastern taxiway. Thermal imaging showed the aircraft's engines were cold. It had been sitting for hours. The glide bomb pylons under the wings were loaded. This aircraft had been scheduled for a dawn sortie. Impact. The warhead detonated on the upper fuselage, just behind the cockpit. The Su-34's fuel tanks, still carrying several tons of aviation kerosene for the morning mission, ignited instantly. A fireball erupted from the revetment, sending burning fuel across the taxiway. 14 seconds later, a second drone struck the next revetment. This Su-34 took the hit on the port wing root, severing the wing and detonating the ordnance mounted on the inner pylon. A FAB-500 glide bomb, not yet armed for flight, cracked open under the thermal stress. 500 kilograms of TNT equivalent explosive don't require a fuse to become dangerous when engulfed in burning jet fuel. The explosion was massive. It threw debris across a 200-meter radius, damaging a third aircraft parked 2 revetments down the line. Now the base was fully alerted, sirens, crews scrambling from their quarters, fire trucks racing toward the eastern taxiway. The Pantsir-S1 operators finally reoriented their radars to the northeast, but the sky was already full of contacts, and distinguishing incoming strike drones from the burning debris and smoke was nearly impossible. At 2:54 a.m., a third strike drone hit the damaged third Su-34. This aircraft had already suffered shrapnel damage from the second explosion, but it was still largely intact. The drone struck the nose section, destroying the aircraft's Leninets B004 phased array radar and cockpit. The aircraft burned where it sat. Subscribe to WarfistTV if you want to understand how modern warfare actually works, because what you're watching isn't just a battle, it's the future of air warfare. The fourth Su-34 was hit at 3:02 a.m. This aircraft was parked slightly further south, in a revetment that had been hastily constructed from earthen berms after the 2024 Storm Shadow attack. The berms were lower than standard, roughly 2 meters high, and offered virtually no overhead protection. The drone came in at a steep descent angle, almost vertical in its terminal phase, and impacted the aircraft's center fuselage. The pilot of this particular aircraft, call sign Sokol-4 in Russian, had reportedly conducted a mission just 14 hours earlier, dropping 4 FAB-500 glide bombs on Ukrainian positions near Avdiivka. Now his aircraft was a burning skeleton of titanium and aluminum. 4 Su-34s confirmed destroyed. The eastern taxiway was an inferno, but the strike wasn't over. Phase 3 commenced at 3:18 a.m. A final wave of Ukrainian drones approaching from a third bearing, this time from the south, targeted the fuel storage facility located adjacent to the eastern flight line. This facility consisted of 4 above-ground fuel tanks, each holding approximately 200,000 liters of aviation-grade kerosene, plus a pump station and underground distribution piping that fed the aircraft parking areas. The first drone struck the northernmost fuel tank directly. The tank ruptured and the kerosene ignited, creating an immediate pool fire that began spreading across the containment berm. The second drone hit the pump station, severing the pressurized fuel lines. Kerosene sprayed from the ruptured pipes, feeding the fire. At 3:24 a.m., the second fuel tank detonated. The fireball rose over 100 meters into the air. The thermal pulse was so intense that it was detected by a European Sentinel satellite on a scheduled pass. The explosion created a pressure wave that shattered windows in buildings 500 meters away and knocked a fire crew off their feet. The remaining 2 fuel tanks went up sequentially over the next 40 minutes as the spreading fire reached them. By 4 a.m., the fuel storage facility was a single, massive blaze, sending a column of dense black smoke thousands of meters into the pre-dawn sky. Russian emergency crews fought the fires for over 6 hours. Commercial satellite imagery from the morning of February 14th showed the smoke plume extending more than 80 kilometers downwind. The 4 destroyed Su-34s were visible as burned-out hulks in their revetments. The fuel storage area was completely gutted. How many Su-34 fighter bombers did Ukraine destroy in this single strike? A. 2, B. 4, C. 6. The answer is coming at the end of this video. Let's talk about what these losses actually mean. A Su-34 fullback costs approximately $36 million per unit when production costs, avionics, and integration are factored in. 4 aircraft, $144 million in airframes alone. Add the weapons destroyed with them. Each aircraft was loaded with 2 to 4 FAB-500 UMPK glide bombs worth approximately $25,000 each, and the ammunition cost pushes the total higher. Then there's the fuel. 800,000 liters of aviation kerosene plus the storage infrastructure, pumping equipment, and distribution system. Replacement cost for the fuel facility alone is estimated at $15 to $20 million, and reconstruction takes months, not weeks. Conservative estimates place the total material cost of the Morozovsk strike at over $170 million. The Ukrainian drone swarm that inflicted this damage? Total estimated cost for the entire operation, decoys, CD drones, strike drones, all 3 waves, is believed to be under $2 million. Some estimates put it closer to $1 million. That's an asymmetric exchange ratio of roughly 85 to 1 in Ukraine's favor, measured in dollar terms. But the financial cost isn't even the most important number. The strategic cost is what really matters. Russia began the full-scale invasion with approximately 130 Su-34 aircraft. Attrition throughout 2022, 2023, 2024, and 2025 from combat losses, accidents, and previous airfield strikes had reduced that number significantly. Exact figures are debated, but most open-source analysts estimate Russia had between 80 and 95 operational Su-34s as of early 2026. Russian production capacity for the Su-34 is limited. The Novosibirsk aviation plant, the sole manufacturer, produces an estimated 6 to 10 new airframes per year. Losing 4 Su-34s in a single night represents roughly half a year's production capacity. You cannot replace these aircraft quickly. You cannot accelerate production without components that are increasingly difficult to source under international sanctions. Each loss is effectively permanent for the duration of this war, and the immediate tactical impact was even more severe than the hardware loss. Within hours of the strike, Russian air commanders ordered a dispersal of remaining aircraft from Morozovsk to secondary airfields deeper in Russian territory. Su-34s were relocated to bases in Rostov Oblast, Volgograd Oblast, and reportedly as far east as Orenburg, putting them 400 to 700 kilometers from the front line instead of 180. This dispersal dramatically increased turnaround times, and Su-34 operating from Morozovsk could launch, fly to its release point, drop glide bombs, and return for rearming in approximately 90 minutes per sortie. From a base 500 kilometers away, that same sortie cycle stretches to over 3 hours. The aircraft burns more fuel getting to the release point. It spends less time in the operational area. It requires additional tanker support. Maintenance crews are stretched across multiple bases instead of concentrated at one. Ukrainian ground commanders along the Donetsk front noticed the effect almost immediately. On February 15th, the day after the strike, Ukrainian units near Pokrovsk reported 0 FAB-500 glide bomb attacks for the first time in over 2 months. On February 16th, 1 attack was recorded, down from an average of 8 to 12 per day. This lull lasted nearly 2 weeks. Russian close air support didn't return to pre-strike levels along the Donetsk axis until late February, and even then, sortie rates were roughly 40% lower than they had been before the Morozovsk attack. If you believe tactics win wars, type WarfistTV in the comments, because what Ukraine demonstrated at Morozovsk isn't just a successful attack. It's a new model for how a country without air superiority can neutralize an opponent's air power. For those 2 weeks of reduced Russian air activity, Ukrainian ground forces had something they hadn't had in months: room to breathe. Units that had been under constant glide bomb threat could reposition. Supply convoys could move with reduced risk. Engineers could reinforce defensive positions without the constant threat of a 500-kilogram bomb arriving from 50 kilometers away with zero warning. The human cost on the Russian side is harder to quantify. Morozovsk operates as a garrison base, not a frontline position, so the attack did not produce mass infantry casualties. Ukrainian intelligence estimates suggest between 8 and 15 Russian military personnel were injured by debris and fire, with at least 2 fatalities among ground crews who were near the revetments when the first drones struck. These numbers have not been independently confirmed. What is confirmed through intercepted radio communications published by Ukrainian intelligence on February 17th is the panic and confusion that followed the attack. Fragments of communications between Morozovsk's base commander and the Southern Military District headquarters reveal a chaotic chain of command. The base commander reported the initial drone contacts at 2:25 a.m., but described them as reconnaissance UAVs, no immediate threat. By 2:50 a.m., with 2 aircraft already burning, the tone had changed to frantic requests for additional fire suppression assets and medical evacuation. One intercepted exchange between a maintenance officer and the Flight Operations Center captures the moment clearly. The officer reports, "Revetments 3 and 4 are fully involved. We cannot approach. The heat is too intense. Sokol 2 and Sokol 3 are gone. Sokol 4 is burning. We need foam trucks from Milorovo." The response from operations: "Milorovo cannot send assets. They are on their own alert. Use what you have." Milorovo, another Russian airfield approximately 160 kilometers northeast of Morozovsk, was on alert because its commander feared a follow-up Ukrainian strike on his own base. That fear was justified. Ukraine had demonstrated the ability to reach Morozovsk. Milorovo was even closer to Ukrainian-controlled territory. The paranoia spread. Within 72 hours of the Morozovsk strike, at least 3 additional Russian airfields in southern Russia implemented emergency dispersal protocols. Aircraft were moved to bases that were less optimal operationally, but further from perceived drone range. Maintenance schedules were disrupted. Sortie generation suffered across the entire southern military district, not just at Morozovsk. This is the cascading effect of a successful deep strike. You don't just destroy what you hit, you degrade everything connected to it. What would NATO have done differently if planning this strike? Would a manned aircraft attack have been more effective? Or did the drone swarm approach offer advantages that no piloted mission could match? Drop your analysis in the comments. Let's examine the tactical lessons. Lesson 1. Suppression of enemy air defenses is not optional. The Ukrainian planners understood that Morozovsk's Pantsir-S1 systems could engage and destroy strike drones if they were alerted and oriented correctly. The decoy wave wasn't just a distraction. It was a deliberate SEAD operation that forced Russian air defense operators to commit their attention and their limited missile supply in the wrong direction. By the time the main strike package arrived from the northeast, the Pantsir crews were reloading or tracking phantom targets. This multi-axis, sequenced approach mirrors what Western air forces have practiced for decades. You don't fly into a defended airspace without first degrading the defenses. Lesson 2. The open revetment problem. Russia knew its hardened shelters were damaged. They chose to park high-value aircraft in open revetments rather than invest the time and resources to fully repair the shelters or build new ones. This was a calculated risk based on the assumption that the existing air defense network would intercept any incoming threats. That assumption was wrong. The revetments protected against horizontal blast but offered zero protection against vertically descending drones. This is a design flaw that will force every air force in the world to rethink how it protects parked aircraft. Lesson 3. Drone swarms change the math of airbase attack. During the Cold War, attacking an enemy airfield required dozens of manned aircraft, CD packages, electronic warfare support, and significant risk to pilots. The cost was enormous, and the losses were expected to be high. Ukraine achieved a comparable result: 4 frontline combat aircraft destroyed, fuel infrastructure eliminated, sortie generation disrupted for weeks, using unmanned systems that cost roughly 1% of a single Su-34. No Ukrainian pilot was at risk, no Ukrainian aircraft was exposed to enemy air defenses. This inversion of the cost-risk equation is the most important lesson of the Morozovsk strike. It suggests that any aircraft parked within range of an adversary's long-range drone capability is vulnerable, regardless of how many air defense systems protect it. The defender must intercept every drone. The attacker only needs a few to get through. Lesson 4. The fuel infrastructure was as important as the aircraft. Destroying 4 Su-34s was a dramatic headline, but eliminating 800,000 liters of aviation fuel and the storage infrastructure to hold it arguably caused more operational disruption. Aircraft can be flown in from other bases. Fuel infrastructure takes months to rebuild. Without fuel on site, Morozovsk could not resume normal operations even if replacement aircraft were available. This is classic air strategy. Attack the logistics, not just the platforms. Lesson 5. Timing and intelligence are the true force multipliers. The strike worked because Ukrainian intelligence identified the precise window when aircraft were parked in vulnerable positions, air defense crews were on reduced alert, and the weather conditions, a calm, overcast night with no moon, favored drone operations. Without accurate, real-time intelligence on aircraft positions and air defense status, the same drone swarm might have arrived to find empty revetments and fully alert Pantsir systems. The drones were the weapon. The intelligence was the strategy. Let's bring it back to the question I posed earlier. How many Su-34 fighter bombers did Ukraine destroy at Morozovsk? The answer is B. 4 aircraft. Ukrainian General Staff reports confirmed 4 Su-34s destroyed in their revetments. This was subsequently corroborated by commercial satellite imagery, showing 4 distinct burn marks consistent with aircraft-sized fires in the eastern revetment area. Some initial Ukrainian social media claims suggested as many as 6 aircraft destroyed, but careful analysis of the satellite imagery and the known revetment layout at Morozovsk supports 4 confirmed kills. A 5th aircraft may have sustained damage from debris, but this has not been confirmed. 4 aircraft, $144 million in airframes, 2 weeks of disrupted air operations, months of fuel infrastructure rebuilding, a cascade of defensive dispersals across southern Russia for the cost of a handful of drones. Now, 3 questions to close this analysis. First, was the 3-phase approach, decoys first, strike drones second, fuel infrastructure third, the optimal sequencing? Or should Ukraine have reversed the order, hitting the fuel depot first to create chaos and illumination before striking the aircraft? Second, could Russia have prevented this strike? They knew Morozovsk had been hit before. They knew their shelters were damaged. They had 2 years to harden the base properly. Why didn't they? Was it a resource allocation failure, a command decision, or a systemic inability to adapt? Third, what would you have done differently? If you were the Ukrainian drone warfare commander, would you have allocated more drones to ensure 6 or 8 aircraft were destroyed? Or was the conservative approach, 4 confirmed kills with minimal drone expenditure, the smarter play, preserving assets for future strikes? Subscribe to WarfistTV, because we break down the battles that textbooks will study for decades. Real tactics, real consequences. WarfistTV. The Morozovsk Airfield is operational again. The fuel depot is being rebuilt. New aircraft have been moved in, though reportedly they are now housed in whatever hardened shelters remain functional. But the scars are there. The scorched revetments, the rebuilt fencing, the additional Pantsir-S1 systems moved in to bolster the defenses. And somewhere in Ukraine, drone operators are studying the satellite imagery, noting the changes, adjusting their plans. Because in this war, no airfield is safe, no aircraft on the ground is untouchable, and a country that was never designed to strike deep into Russia has built the capability to do exactly that, one drone at a time. The wreckage at Morozovsk is cooling, but the lesson it taught burns brighter every day. Modern warfare doesn't forgive complacency, not at any altitude, not at any range, and not behind any number of air defense batteries. Stay vigilant.